I know what it's like to lose, to feel so desperately that you're right, yet to fail nonetheless. Thanos says that to a man he's about to destroy, and the terrifying part is that he means it. Because Thanos isn't lying about the loss. He watched his world die exactly the way he said it would. He proposed the solution, they called him insane, and then Titan collapsed anyway. And in that moment, standing alone on the ruins of everything he tried to save, certainty stopped being an idea. It became the only thing left. This is Disassembled Heroes and Villains, and this is the story of Thanos, and what happens when a man becomes so certain he's right that he stops being able to see what it's costing. Thanos wasn't always certain. He was once just the son of Titan, a civilization, a world that had everything it needed, except the wisdom to protect it. He watched the resources dwindle away, watched the population grow beyond what the system could sustain, watched a world consuming itself faster than anyone was willing to admit, and he ran the numbers, studied the patterns, came to a conclusion no one wanted to hear, that survival would require a cost no one was willing to pay. Half the population, chosen at random so the other half could live. It wasn't cruelty or conquest. In his mind, it was mercy. He brought the proposal forward, and they called him insane, rejected it, refused to accept that survival might cost more than they were comfortable giving, and so they did nothing, and Thanos watched Titan die. Watched the system fail exactly the way he said it would. Watched a civilization collapse under the weight of its own denial. The line was crossed here, quietly, before anyone was watching. Because being right when no one believed you, it doesn't just vindicate the idea, it means the idea becomes a part of your identity. It stops being something you believe, and starts being something you are. And once that happens, the next step feels not just logical, it feels righteous. If he had been right about Titan, he could be right about the universe. If no one had listened then, he wouldn't ask permission now. Titan was one world. The universe was full of them, and Thanos had already been right once. Every world he visited was Titan waiting to happen. Every civilization consuming more than it could sustain. Every population moving towards the same cliff, to slowly see it coming. So he did what he believed no one else was willing to do. He went from planet to planet, and he corrected the imbalance. Half the population, random selection, no bias or judgment, just balance restored. And in his mind, the mission was merciful. He goes to Nivandalir, to a forge built inside a dying star, where the dwarf blacksmith Atiri has the power to make something capable of harnessing all 6 Infinity Stones. Atiri believed that if he cooperated, his people would be spared. He made what Thanos wanted, and Thanos killed them all anyway. 300 dwarves gone, leaving only Atiri alive, but encasing his hands in metal, not to preserve him for later, so he could never forge another weapon again. It's not merciful. It's a man who has decided the mission overrides every commitment he makes to the people in front of him, and it shows up closest to home. He adopts children from the world he destroys. Gamora, Nebula. He raises them, trains them, calls them his daughters, and then forces them to fight each other repeatedly. Because competition makes them stronger, and every time Nebula loses to Gamora, he removes a piece of her body and replaces it with machinery, piece by piece, fight by fight, not in anger and optimization. Because in a system built around the mission, even love becomes a tool for improvement. Every family becomes infrastructure, and Thanos never stops to ask what Nebula is experiencing, what Gamora is witnessing, what it cost 2 children to grow up inside a vision they never chose. Because the mission doesn't ask the questions, it only asks what's useful. I know what that looks like when a mission stops asking permission. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other." Thanos believes he's serving life, but what he's actually serving is the certainty that he's right about life. And those 2 things are not the same. One keeps people at the center, the other keeps the mission at the center, and arranges people around it. Because from the inside, it still feels like love, it still feels like sacrifice, it still feels like doing what needs to be done for the people you care about. But the people you care about aren't experiencing your intentions, they're experiencing your absence. And absence has a way of accumulating quietly, until one day someone names it, or until you finally sit still long enough to see it yourself. Thanos never sits still long enough. The mission won't allow it, because eventually, the mission stops costing strangers, and starts costing someone he actually loves. By the time Thanos reaches Vormir, he's already sacrificed everything that could be replaced. Armies, planets, promises. He's left worlds in ruins and called it mercy. He's broken the people closest to him and called it preparation. He's committed every imaginable act in service of the mission, and none of it has cost him the one thing the Soul Stone requires, something he loves. He arrives in Vormir with Gamora at his side. The Stonekeeper meets them on a towering cliff, explains the requirement, and Gamora laughs, not out of cruelty, out of relief, because she believes, genuinely believes, that Thanos has nothing left to sacrifice, that he has spent so long serving the mission that he has nothing personal left, no one who matters, nothing that could qualify as love. And then she looks at his face, and the laugh dies, because she sees it. He's crying, genuinely crying. He loves her, and it isn't enough to stop him. He grabs her, she pleads, she fights, and he throws her off the cliff anyway, through tears, with full awareness of what he's doing. And the Soul Stone appears in his hand, because it doesn't let you dismiss him as a monster. It forces you to sit inside something far more uncomfortable, a man who genuinely loves someone and chooses the mission anyway, not in spite of the love, almost because of it, as if the willingness to sacrifice even this proves how right he must be. Because what kind of man would do this if he wasn't absolutely certain? I've never stood on a cliff like that, but I've sat in a quiet house late at night and felt a smaller version of that weight. Mark 8:36 says, "What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul?" Thanos gains the Soul Stone. He stands on Vormir holding the proof he was willing to pay the highest price, and he has never been emptier, because the tears on his face weren't weakness. They were evidence. Evidence that he knew exactly what he was losing and chose the mission anyway. Feeling the cost doesn't mean you stop paying it, because he isn't a man who doesn't care. He's a man who cares and does it anyway. And somehow, that's worse. After collecting all the Infinity Stones, Thanos ends up with Thor's axe buried in his chest. Not a glancing blow, not a wound he can walk off. It's deep, it's deliberate, placed there by a man who wanted him to feel it dying slowly. And Thanos looks at him and snaps his fingers anyway. Half of all life in the universe dissolves, just like that. And in the silence that follows, Thanos teleports to a planet, a garden, alone, wounded, relieved. He spends the next weeks farming, tending to land, watching the sun rise over a world that has nothing to do with the mission. Because the mission is finished. He knows it. He uses the Infinity Stones one final time, not to create anything, to destroy them. He reduces them to atoms, knowing the process might kill him. It nearly does. Burns half his body, fuses the gauntlet to his hand permanently, and he sits in the garden anyway, content, because the work is done. And when the Avengers finally track him down, when they arrive hoping to use the stones to undo what he did, Thanos doesn't fight back. Not really. He just tells them the truth. The stones are gone. There's nothing left to undo. In that moment, the Avengers realize something devastating. He actually won. This is what winning looks like. A broken body, a burned hand, a quiet planet, alone, farming. I don't have a garden planet, but I know what that feels like when something ends and the quiet arrives. And the quiet doesn't feel like the way you expect it. When the shop closed in 2023, there was relief. Real relief. I wasn't packing orders at midnight anymore. I wasn't watching margins that didn't work. I wasn't splitting my attention across two worlds simultaneously. The pressure lifted, and then something else became clear. I was back at square one. Not in a dramatic sense, just quietly. Back to the actuarial career, back to the system I had been running alongside the shop for 3 years. The stability was real, the income was consistent, the ceiling was still there. And underneath all of it, that same gnawing, the one the shop was supposed to answer, the one I had poured 3 years and everything I had into, was still there. Still unresolved, because here's the thing I didn't want to admit. The shop was never going to fill that void, because the void wasn't about the shop. It was about the real question underneath it. How do I build something that feels fully mine, while providing for my family inside a system I didn't design? The shop was my answer to that, and it turned out to be the wrong answer, which meant the question was still waiting. Ecclesiastes 2:11 says, "Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun." Solomon wasn't condemning the work, he was naming what happens when the work is done, and the thing you thought it would produce isn't there. Thanos sits in the garden having answered his question. Half the universe is gone, the mission is complete, and something in the silence feels unresolved. Not because he doubts the decision, but because certainty can survive every obstacle on the way to the destination. It cannot survive arriving there, and finding the destination insufficient. That's what the garden scene actually shows. It's not peace, not fulfillment, just the absence of the mission. And without the mission, there's nothing left. Because when certainty becomes your entire identity, and the thing you were certain about is finished, you don't get to just become someone else. You sit in the quiet, and the quiet asks a question certainty was never designed to answer. Now what? Before we get into the final part of this story, I want to sit with that question for a second. Now what? Because that's the question certainty was never designed to answer, and it's the question most men are quietly carrying. Not loudly or dramatically, just underneath everything else. Underneath the career, the responsibility, the version of success that looks right from the outside. There's a question that hasn't been answered yet, and it's exactly what the show is built around. Not tearing down the things you've built, not telling you the mission was wrong, but slowing down long enough to ask whether the certainty driving it is still serving you. If that question matters to you, subscribe. There's a version of Thanos who already won. He sits on the garden, farms the land, watches the sun rise, alone. And then there's the version who hasn't won yet. The alternate 2014 Thanos, who learns through Nebula's captured memories that in the future his snap succeeds, and the Avengers travel back in time to undo it. And he doubles down anyway, not despite seeing the outcome, but because of it. He doesn't look at what his future self produced and sees emptiness. He sees proof that the mission was worth it, and so he arrives in the present, not to reconsider, but to finish the job more completely, to destroy the universe entirely, and remake it in his own image. Both versions of Thanos make the same choice, the one who won and the one who hasn't yet, because that certainty doesn't change. That's where Tony Stark becomes so important. Not because Tony is perfect, not because he doesn't carry his own certainty, but because when Tony makes his final choice, he doesn't make it for an ideology, he makes it for certain people. He doesn't snap his fingers for the mission, he snaps them for the ones he loves and the ones he lost. Because the opposite of Thanos isn't someone without conviction, it's someone who's still accountable to the people standing in front of them. I've been there. The shop was built on certainty, a certainty that the work would eventually justify the cost, that the people I love would benefit from the outcome, even while absorbing the damage of the process. And when it ended, the certainty didn't disappear, it just needed somewhere else to go. The channel is that somewhere, and it feels different, not because the ambition is smaller, because the vision finally includes the people it's supposed to be for. The shop demanded things from my family without asking. The channel is built around what I want to give them, not to spite them, but for them. That's the difference between the shop and the channel. And it's the difference between Thanos and Tony. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The plans God has aren't the plans that override the people around you. They're plans that include them, plans that prosper you together, not at their expense. And that's the shift that changes everything. Not the size of the vision, not the certainty of the conviction, but whether the people closest to you are inside the mission or invisible to it. Thanos was certain he was building a better future. He was right about the need. He was wrong about who got to vote. That single error cost him everything that mattered. Not the mission, the people the mission was supposed to be for. Thanos never stopped believing he was right. That's the most honest thing we can say about him. Not that he was just evil, not that he was broken, not that he was simply too powerful for his own good, but that he was certain, completely, irreversibly, certain in a way that left no room for the people standing in front of him. Not because he didn't love them, he did. He wept on Vormir, he called Gamora his daughter, he built a future he genuinely believed would save lives. None of it was enough to make him stop. Because certainty has a blind spot. It tells you why you're doing something. It never tells you what's the cost in the people who never got a vote. And the tragedy of Thanos isn't that his love wasn't real. It's that his certainty was louder than his love. Louder than Gamora's voice on the cliff. Louder than Nebula's pain across decades of loss. Louder than the silence of a garden planet where the man who saved the universe sits alone. Because that's what certainty without accountability produces. Not a future worth living in. Just a future exactly as designed. And designed futures are missing the one thing no plane can manufacture. The people who choose to be there. I think about that when I look at what I'm building now. Not with fear, but with awareness. Because the drive is still there, the certainty is still there, the belief that I see something worth building is still there. But I'm learning to hold it differently. To build with open hands instead of a closed fist. To make sure the people closest to me aren't just benefiting from the outcome someday, but are the part of the story right now. Because children don't inherit your intentions, they inherit your patterns. And the pattern I want to pass down isn't relentless certainty, it's relentless presence. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Not guard your mission, not guard your certainty, guard your heart, because everything flows from it. The decisions you make, the cost you accept, the people you see, and the people you stop seeing because the mission got too loud. Thanos guarded his mission and lost his heart somewhere along the way. So let me leave you with a question this story quietly asked from the beginning. Not about Thanos, about you. Is the certainty driving your life still accountable for the people living inside it? Because if it isn't, the gap between what you're building and what you're experiencing is already wider than you think. And it's worth closing before it costs you something you can't get back. This has been Disassembled Heroes and Villains. Stay deliberate, stay present, and as always, stay handsome.